experience is for the real women who have endured incarceration. And really my role here with my sisters is to just recap and point out some of the things that we want to leave you thinking about. And we did come together. First of all, we started Families for Justice as Healing in the prison yard in Danbury, Connecticut. And we started it because as incarcerated women, we needed and this is, Piper's book came out, I remember my mother sent it to me, and I was the first one in Danbury at the time to receive Orange is the New Black, the book. And we love Piper. Piper, we want to be very clear about that because we are extraordinarily outspoken unapologetically against the series Orange is the New Black. But we want to state here and everywhere we speak that we love Piper. We think that every incarcerated woman should use their voice to write and to speak their experience of what incarceration is like. And we are, just forever grateful for Piper doing that. Before Piper, there were hundreds of women, predominantly women of color, poor black women also, who have been trying to tell their stories. Ironically, it takes a young white woman who's privileged to tell her story and then start making millions of dollars off of it. And that's just how the thing goes. The producer of the show said, nobody's interested in the stories of black women. So our prison system is still disproportionately filled with black and brown people who are poor. And that doesn't always come across either when you're looking at that depiction of Orange is the New Black on the television series. So it's important that we say that, not to mention Piper is not a mother. And the experiences that you've heard, the reason why we sat in that blisteringly hot day in the prison yard at Danbury and started our organization, Families Against, why do I keep getting ready to say that? We were just doing some work with Families Against Mandatory Minimums, who we love. Families for Justice as Healing, our organization, is because we wanted to create, from the voices of incarcerated women, a more accurate portrait of who we are. And as you can see, already, you've met two women that I'm sure you haven't heard a story like that when you think about who were women that were incarcerated. You always hear some really, crazy story. And there are quite a few women who are incarcerated that have really crazy stories that are mostly based around poverty, trauma, and things that aren't criminal justice issues. The illness of addiction, they are issues that are public health issues. And we have gone down a slippery slope in this country where we have criminalized poverty and addiction, and that's what's criminal. That is absolutely what's criminal. And we will continue to go down that slippery slope unless folks like you, who are the future leaders, students like yourselves, begin to stop just accepting the rhetoric, the false portraits, the false information that is just served to you about what we need to do in this country to really begin to heal and help people advance their lives. So we have this organization, Families for Justice as Healing. And we started to create a more accurate portrait of who we are. And then we decided, walking around that track that Carol used to, I took over the job of shoveling the path, because it's true. Prison is probably the most dehumanizing experience of anyone's life. People have a tendency to believe that we send people to prison and somehow miraculously their lives get better and everybody who's impacted by them, their lives get better as well, including any victims that may have been harmed. None of that is true. Prison is incredibly dehumanizing. It is the worst place on the planet to ever begin to help somebody heal, to ever begin to create public safety, and it also becomes generational when you take parents away from their children. So we've got to really restructure our criminal legal system and turn it more into a human system. Because right now, we've allowed ourselves to just be really bamboozled to believe that the things that the majority of people are in prison for are things that people should be warehoused and incarcerated for. And if you've ever sat in a line, in a prison, like we've all have done, crammed in a tiny space with 4 payphones that houses 200 women in that section of the prison, and you hear every single issue. You know intimately every single one of these women's children. You know every single one of the issues that their households are facing. You know all the good times, you know all the bad times. And you stand in these hallways and you sleep side by side with these women. You share your life with them. And you come to realize these aren't bad people. They're not bad people, they're people. They are people who are struggling in a system that says corporations are people, but people aren't people. So we have got to really how we think about this whole issue. Not to mention, if you can't really wrap your head around that, let's just think about this a little bit. You know, poor people of color are a serious minority in this country still, okay? We are not the majority drug users or drug sellers. And that starts with marijuana all the way to the end of the spectrum when we're talking about more addictive drugs like heroin and meth. That goes for drugs across the board. We still make up an absolutely disproportionate number, an unexplained, other than due to race, disproportionate number of people who are targeted and who are incarcerated for drug use. So we don't target the drug war in communities like Newton. We don't target the drug war in more affluent communities of this country where there is just as much and more drug use and drug sales going on. We have decided to use a war on drugs, which was never a war on drugs ever to begin with, to target not just poor black and brown people, because the increasing numbers and the reason why we have so many more women flowing into the federal prison system and prison systems across this country is because of meth, and many of those young women are young white women, young poor white women. So this is a race issue, and it's certainly a class issue. We've got to take our head out of the sand, people. We got to stop saying that we don't believe in ending the war on drugs because we don't think somebody should be smoking pot, or we don't want kids shooting heroin. That is exactly why we have more people that are caught in the cycle of addiction, because the truth about addiction never gets out over the false stories about a war on drugs. So as students, I challenge you all to really do your homework. Read Gabor Mate. Read Kyle Hart, The High Price. Read the books that really are teaching us the truth about addiction, about trauma, about poverty, about the things that lead people to engaging in either drug selling or drug using. And drugs are not the only reason why people are incarcerated. The majority of people, all people, I would say, from my experience, all of us, the one common thread that we all had, we had experienced untreated trauma in our lives. And that is something that everybody in this room can probably say, yeah, you know what? I've had an experience like that myself. So we've got to stop using prison as a default for things that 95% of the women that I was incarcerated with did not need to be separated from society. And none of them needed to be in the condition that was called Danbury Federal Prison. It's never going to be a place where people can begin to heal and advance their lives. It has nothing to do with public safety. So I want to talk to you just very briefly. There's some things that we're doing. So our organization was first and foremost created to create a more accurate portrait of who are incarcerated women. And then we decided, because walking that track, they had broken the ALEC scandal. Who's heard of ALEC? It's impacting every one of our lives. Everybody in this room should know what the American Legislative Exchange Council is, what they do, and how they shape the policy and legislation in this country that impacts all of our lives. ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, created and puts big money behind with corporations that draft model legislation. Most of that is very conservative legislation, voter disenfranchisement, school privatization, every kind of privatization that you can think of, mandatory minimum drug sentencing, everything that you can imagine. ALEC has put the money behind and pushed to get voted into law state by state in the 11th hour, in the middle of the night, and we don't know anything about them. But walking that track in Danbury, I decided as a former lawyer, that's what I'm going to do. That resonated with me. It was what I knew how to do. I knew how to read legislation. I knew how to draft legislation. And we were going to be ALEC, but on the other side. And we sat the next day around a blisteringly hot day around a picnic table in the yard at the Danbury Federal Prison, and we started FJIP. And so now that's what we do. Okay, we go throughout the country. We have met with everybody you can imagine, from the Obama administration to the Justice Department to state legislators across the country. We're at the United Nations. We meet with college students like yourselves. We go in and we meet with our sisters who are in prison, because we do this by organizing formerly and currently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women to use our voices to really help people understand that we have to make changes, and here are the changes that we need to make. Because even as a lawyer who practiced for many years and worked within the criminal justice system for 25 years, I didn't think there was one thing as a professional that anybody could tell me about how broken the system was until I went into that prison and sat on that prison bunk for 2 years with my sisters and lived in a federal prison. And I have to tell you, the people who are currently making the policy, the tables that are absent from the real experts, from the formerly incarcerated people who are the experts in these issues, who need to be at the table, and I applaud Suffolk, and thank you for inviting us here, because we just protested 2 schools who did not have the sense to understand that you may not speak about us without us. And we are putting a stop to that across this country as formerly incarcerated women. You may not convene things like this to provide information about what needs to be changed in the criminal justice system and how it needs to be changed without having the real experts at the table. Formerly incarcerated people are those experts. So we draft model legislation. We currently have a bill that's pending here in Massachusetts called HB 1382. Susan is an incredible asset to our organization and to all of our women. We couldn't do half the work that we do without her, and we thank her and Suffolk University for the resources. But we need help. We need people that will call. There's a list outside. You need to take it. You need to understand that these things are happening. And you need to get engaged. And guess what? If you're not from Massachusetts, we draft model legislation across the country. Let us know where you're from and help us to connect with those places so that we can get that legislation passed in your state as well. And I will end with this. I mentioned about Piper, and I love Piper. Piper is incredibly helpful. You always call Piper and say, Piper, we can't pay the office rent, and she'll help us out. But let me tell you something. You cannot make millions of dollars off of the back of the most poor and vulnerable women in the world and take that money and squirrel it away somewhere like the producers of Netflix has done and the Netflix company. And we are asking them to create a housing fund. If you ever can imagine what it's like to have been separated from your children, the last time you saw them, it was at the end of some ridiculous police raid when you were looking out the back window of a police vehicle, watching your children as you were being driven away, and that was 7, 8, 9 years ago. You have not laid your eyes on your children since that day. When I went to prison and left my youngest child, my baby was the size of the little baby who's in the back of the room. My baby was 5 months old. I was still breastfeeding my son. Things that people do not think about when you separate women from children. My son didn't know what mommy meant. I was the mommy lady. So you have to understand how very important these issues are when we're talking about separating, particularly mothers from their children. We need your help. We need a housing fund to be created. Women cannot, if they're lucky enough to not have lost their children because of the time frame that the American Adoption Act allows for children to be adopted, if their parents have not had contact with them, and it's real hard to have contact if you're from Houston and you're in a federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut, and you want desperately every day to see your children, and you cry yourself at night wondering how they're doing, and you can't see them, but it's not because of, you can't be with them. You're locked in a prison somewhere. But your children are still eligible to be placed in adoption. And what a woman who's lucky enough to still have the control to ask permission to receive her children back, she has to jump through a number of reentry hoops when she comes home. One of them is that she has to find housing. Our membership, we have women who have been home for 4 years and are still living at Pine Street. literally, who still go to Rosie's Place every day to eat. They can't raise the money it costs in a gentrified city like Boston to get an apartment. And so this is very real. So when we have something like Netflix that's making millions and millions, I don't know who they're sharing that money with, because it's not any of the formerly incarcerated women that they're talking about. We need them to start a housing fund so that women come out of the federal system, have some recourse for getting some assistance with that first, last, and security. We have women who return to prostitution after coming home, not because they relapsed. That eventually happens because prostitution will take you back there, but they initially return to prostitution to feed their children. That's criminal. That's what's criminal in this country. So I ask you for that help. I'm closing here with one last thing that I want you all, and Carol knows this. We love you, Carol, and she was incredibly nervous. But we have a campaign that Carol is a part of that is sweeping this country to put the word inmate to rest. Inmate is an incredibly dehumanizing word. It is used to separate us. It is used to create a permanent second-class citizenship. It stays with us. We are strip searched. We are groped. You imagine going out to the visiting room to visit your husband and your children, and before you go out there, you have to have a 6-foot big burly guy stick his hands in your crotch, probe your vagina area, feel your breast, and do things that you would never imagine having anybody but your loved one who you're married to do something like that to, or who you choose to have touch you in that way. And he does it on purpose to send a message that I'm controlling your body now. So language does matter. They call us inmates. From the time we wake up in the morning, the lights go on at 6 a.m., they don't go off until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. We are forced to live under that kind of sensory deprivation. The loudspeaker is blasting. They call us inmate good James, inmate Codianni, inmate, all day long. My inmates are coming. I'm going to send my inmates. It is incredibly horrible, horrific. And what it allows us to do, it allows all of you to actually think you're better than us. And that isn't right. It's not true. We are all human beings, and we deserve the dignity to be treated as human beings. And when we create these labels, it makes it extraordinarily difficult for those of us coming home to really feel like human beings ever again. So I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for taking the time to actually care. We have interns that come, not from Suffolk. We love some. This didn't come from Suffolk. We've had some interns who come from some very elite schools in this country. Every summer we get a swath of interns who have come to me as the executive director and founder of Families for Justice and Healing and said, you know, Andrea, I'm so excited that I'm getting this opportunity to come and intern here because I really want to go to prison but not really go. And that is a result of Orange is the New Black. Okay, that is a result of the Netflix series. And we've got to really change that. Of course, by the time they finish with us, their entire lives are dramatically different, not just a summer internship. They have an experience that changes their lives in profound ways. So I want to encourage you all, continue learning, continue reaching for the truth, understand that your education has to also include the education of the real experts. Thank you.